Commission to order. Please call the roll.
Mr. Coleman.
Present.
Ms. Herring. Present. Mr. Nicely.
Here.
Ms. Riviera.
Here.
Ms. Van Gundy. Councilman Rohr.
Here.
Chairman Hatton.
Here. I understand that Ms. Van Gundy is absent and was ill and had called in. Can we get a motion for that?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Coleman.
Yes.
Ms. Herring.
Yes.
Mr. Nicely.
Yes.
Ms. Riviera.
Yes.
Councilman Rohr.
Yes.
Chairman Hatton.
Yes. Number 2 on the agenda, election of officers. This was on the agenda for last meeting. The other commissions have moved to, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Epplin, to June or July timeframe?
July.
That's the process we're kind of moving to this year as a
Okay.
city, although not all of them have necessarily held those elections yet. So
Right.
I would continue to recommend you try to wait till you have a full body just to be consistent with myself and what I told you before, if nothing else, but it's obviously at your pleasure. I
Right.
think Stephanie's going to be here tonight. She's sick.
So we did not have a full board last meeting. We did not have a full board in this meeting. As I said, that may be the mythical unicorn. It doesn't happen very often. But what is the flavor? If someone wants to take it off the table, that's great. Otherwise, we can just ignore it and it will stay on the table. I will take the silence that we will leave that on the table, so that will be on the agenda for next meeting. Item number 3, approval of the motion summary of the HPC meeting held on July 25th as recorded and transcribed. Did everybody get a chance to look at the minutes? If yes, did anyone have any changes, questions, concerns? Seeing none, we would need a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Coleman.
Yes.
Ms. Herring. Yes. Mr. Nicely.
Yes.
Ms. Riviera.
Yes.
Councilman Rohr.
Abstain.
Chairman Hatton.
Yes. All right, item 4A is, these are regular business. It's a request by Indus Hotels for an informal review for the proposed demolition and construction of a hotel at 7 and 27 Spring Street, which are zoned B3, which is a community business district, and located in the transitional subdistrict of the Downtown Historic District overlay. This was before us for an informal review at our July meeting. I assume that they have taken some of our feedback and have brought forward some new ideas. With that, I will turn it over to staff for their report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going to keep this brief because we do have 2 informal reviews, one for the second go around here with Indus Hotels and just have an opportunity to have conversations with the applicant. But just a quick reminder, we're on Spring Street here. The property is zoned B3, and so part of the conversation is that part of this process for the applicant, not for HPC, is that that zoning would have to change to allow a hotel. Applicant's aware of that, and that would be a separate process for Planning Commission and Council as per usual. But as what we normally do when things are within the historic district and they're brand new builds, which doesn't happen very often, but when it does, the place to really start the conversation is with respect to the Historic Preservation Commission, so an applicant can understand, what kind of building can I build and how much might it cost, where can it sit on a property, and those sorts of things. At the end of the day, they have to get the answer to all those questions. It is in the transitional subdistrict, and again, one of the things that we've discussed is that if the zoning were to be changed or proposed to be changed to, for example, the downtown core district, that it might make some sense to also change this sub-district to the downtown core to kind of match the zoning to the historic district overlay, although it doesn't have to.
Can I interrupt you real quick,
Yeah.
Dave? You mentioned that last time, and I thought, so would the idea be that we would just completely move red everywhere, or would that, so that it's contiguous, or because
Doesn't have to be.
we would spot,
We would just do red downtown core here on these properties. They're kind of on their own anyway, really, on this south side of Spring Street.
I asked because I know spot zoning is generally either illegal or at least frowned upon. And since this is really an overlay on zoning, is that?
Spot zoning, in my opinion, wouldn't apply to the overlay of the historic district.
Okay.
This applies your guidelines in different ways.
Okay.
You're not changing the fact that it's in the historic district or out of the historic district, which wouldn't necessarily be spot zoning, in my opinion. Either spot zoning is sort of the term that relates to when you zone a piece of property. It can actually be a big piece of property. It doesn't just, we think of it as a small piece of property, but it could be a big one. But it's a zoning change that would apply to one property that generally wouldn't apply to other properties in a similar condition across your community. And so that's part of the test that you look at for spot zoning. Those are things we'd have to evaluate in the zone change process from the B3 to the B2 or whatever the request could be. One of the requests could be to the POI district, which allows hotels as conditional uses, as we all probably know at this point from other cases. But that requires then some other setbacks that are different than maybe this pretty urban condition. So.
And so just maybe for clarification, everybody, would the idea by having that core, it gives them a little more leeway?
I think it probably does under your
setbacks.
guidelines to better fit sort of the direction, albeit conceptual direction,
Right.
that you gave them last time. I think we're just sort of talking about the position on the lot probably more than anything with respect to that. But of course, you have the ability to also look at that sort of thing and say in this particular application, you know, this location is okay or that location is okay as well.
Dave, go ahead.
No, I was just curious, with that rezoning process, is there a public comment period that would slow any projects
So
down?
with any rezoning, and if we were to change the historic district overlay, my recommendation would be that the base zoning change and that change would come together. They kind of go together. And that would go to a sub-district overlay would come to you for a recommendation to city council. The base zoning would go to planning commission. The base zoning change requires public hearings, notification, a sign on the site, that sort of thing is a formal public hearing. You guys generally don't do that with these sub-district overlays. Again, you're not adding or subtracting to the historic district. You're just deciding on the sub-district of it. So, but the quick answer is yes, all that will go through a public process. And obviously we have open public meetings here. So.
So Dave, I guess I'm kind of questioning, since the scope of the project would require variances or a number of variances, you know, regardless of whether it's in the core or the sub-district.
Right.
Is there really any, from an HPC standpoint, any imperative that it become part of the core, since it's only going to be those properties and non-contiguous with the rest of the core district? What does it gain? You know, or what does the process or the applicant or the city gain by making that change?
Yeah, good question. And I think the easiest answer I can give you is we haven't done that deep a dive in to be able to answer your question in any kind of specificity now. So I'd just be speculating for you. I think at the end of the day, if you leave it orange or you change it red, you know, it's going to be up to the city of Delaware at the end of the day anyhow. Will it make any difference with the particular project as it's proposed? I'm not sure it has to.
Well, the other thing, thought I've got is, because this is a quite different project than anything that's come before us before, and it kind of opens the possibility that down the road, other projects with that kind of height, you know, could be of interest to somebody. In the sub-district, I don't, you know, around the corner where this one is, I don't think the height is as big of a concern to me anyway, as it would be to build a, you know, a 6-story building, say, you know, just say south of the check cashing place here. Somebody wanted to take that lot and put a hotel there or something of that nature. So I'm wondering if by leaving that as the sub-district, that kind of also gives us, you know, at least an option to say, look, this type of, 6-story building in the core district is, not precedent. There's no precedent for that. And that might give us a little, protection against having to fight that battle down the road.
We could definitely take a look at that, assuming that this progresses to formal applications, and try to give you some determination in that regard. I think you do have a little bit of a difference here between what your guidelines say, sub-district or no, in terms of height, and what the base zoning code says you can do in terms of height in either one of those base zoning districts. So those are things to consider as well.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, moving on. So aerial photograph, should we need it? Again, a couple of historic reference photos. I do still have the photos in here if we want to refer to them. I'm just going to click through them very quickly. And then there's, this is the updated site plan, which is pretty much has a building in one of the two options I think we looked at last time. Set back just a little bit from the street. I will report that we had a applicant and staff meeting this week. So after our report went out, but before this meeting, to kind of discuss this stuff. And that included us and planning, engineering, the fire department. I think utilities was there at that meeting. They all kind of run together after a while, I want to be honest with you. And the applicant had their team there. And so we went over kind of some of the things that we suggested in the written report, but I just want to go over what we discussed with you so you have the benefit of at least hearing that, and then I'm sure Warren will do this too. But so to the back of the building, there is a pretty significant hillside in that green space they're showing really behind the hotel on this diagram. And it starts up by the university and the Hamwell Center and the other buildings. And it really is, from what I could tell, and Dave Kozar from Indus we were out there walking it together. Just happened to do that. We left our meeting and we both went out to do the same thing. Look at the site. So that was good. But it is basically a dirt hill that ends in fairly modern concrete retaining wall, half of which is actually falling down because the hill is pushing it down, and half of which is a little farther to the south. That's actually an old stone laid wall from quite a while ago that is doing quite well and holding the hill back. So there you go, I guess. And that's more to the west side of the property, behind the Napa, but what we think of as the Napa building. So the hill's kind of coming out is the bottom line. And both of our conclusions, at least conceptually, was, well, regardless of anybody's process, if you're going to make this kind of investment, you're going to want to put up some kind of retaining wall, probably right on the other side of these various walls, to make sure that that hill doesn't wind up in your building. And that probably argues to have the building in part where it's set, and here on this diagram, but maybe some other details that we just don't have in these yet. They're not to that point of detail. The other thing we talked about was how you would potentially circulate. It might open up an opportunity if you could get behind the building, kind of going backwards here a little bit, to have some parking and a circulation aisle, and it's just the combination of that hillside, another retaining wall, and the fact that the museum property, these two properties are pretty flat. When they put those buildings in, they graded those lots. They're not perfectly flat, but pretty flat. But the museum site was graded more towards Sandusky Street and having to grade back towards Spring. So that driveway has easily 8 feet at least of difference between the far south part of it and Spring Street. So there is just literally no way you could somehow connect those, not across this very small couple of lots. So it's not my conclusion, but after being presented that information, city engineer, at least conceptually, agreed with that. So you got a lot of grade going on here, however you slice it. But the other thing the applicant brought up, but it's a fair point, is that to really get traffic out of the traffic stream to a drop-off point just in front of this building, and on this diagram, it makes it look like it's set back tremendously far. But I think from the curb, it was about 20 feet or so.
It's 25 feet.
25 feet from the curb. Not, we usually measure from the right-of-way line, which is back sidewalk. So there was some.
It is from the right.
So there was some debate about that distance. I can tell you the museum building is set back 12 feet from the right-of-way, so the back of the sidewalk. Less this little notch right there, where handicap parking is, that setback, that little notch is about 22 feet from the right-of-way, right, the back curve, just to sort of give you a sense of the streetscape right there, such as it is on that side of the street. But then the other thing we talked about was the ability to have an on-street potential of a drop-off as well. So if somebody's in that private one, you can still pull up on the street, go in, check in, get your car, or if there's a bus or something like that, where it might make more sense to just have that at the street rather than to come in. And there was some discussion about how you could make this turn here and still be on the street, because the street's not that wide if you just had things at the street, but things we'll talk about. So some of the things they changed, this is the side elevation, happens to be the east elevation, but to put in some of these kind of recessed panels for these ghost window kind of look to break up the what would otherwise be a fairly blank wall, though there would be windows in the middle and a sign as proposed here. I think the cornice line got much kind of heavier than the last, much more pronounced, but also kind of coming out a little bit, more like not as much as the new courthouse, but more like that, kind of bring down that roof line. And then the canopy, or porte cochere, if you want something that's difficult to spell, got changed into what you see here. Just another note where we go back to the notion of how high this building is. It is 6 stories, and that is high. There's no question about that for our town. However, with all the grades here, that does matter, and it will change perspective. In my opinion, it does matter. It will change your perspective a little bit from the street, but also from far away. Bottom line is that Dave Kozar and I measured around the Hamilton Williams Center, which itself is different on each side of it pretty significantly, because the grade changes from the jaywalk side to the other side. And the bottom line is that the line drawing that was done dimensionally in your packet is pretty close to right on what you'd really see. When you do renderings and in the computer, it's just difficult to do that exactly like what it's going to look like. God knows. But it's about halfway up the pitched metal roof of Ham Williams, or the top of the curved roof of Ham Williams, if you like to think about it that way. We measured that, and from that little area in the railing in front of Ham Williams to the top of that roof on the north side is about 66 feet 9 inches, almost exactly as tall as this building is proposed to be. Ham Williams on the jaywalk side is only about 50-some feet. And that just shows you the difference in the grade even on that particular site. So just wanted to mention that since we took the time to measure it. In this building right out the window, we did measure that one too, to at least the top of the overhang of the cornice from Sandusky Street was about 50 feet. Just to give you a sense of scale. I think you had asked some of those questions last time, and we didn't have great guesstimates, but we took an actual electronic measuring device out this time. So hopefully that helps. So there's 2 different varieties here. One with kind of iron spot brick in the middle, changing the color of the brick to more this Madison blend, this reddish orange brick, sort of ubiquitous in our downtown. And then the other version having a ribbed metal panel in the middle as well. Here it's shown in sort of bluish gray. They changed some of the windows and some of the sort of the front of how this looks as well on the north elevation from the last time to, I think, reflect some of what they heard from me. And again, I have every elevation here. We can go through it. I don't know, Warren, do you want me to bring up yours? Does yours look better than this, or is it the same stuff? Same stuff. So with that, I think I'd stop, really let you have an opportunity to talk to them, and probably want to talk about this, how it's situated on the lot in addition to this kind of stuff.
Are there any other questions for city staff?
I think they made good progress based on the comments I heard from you from the last meeting in terms of how the building went.
You can see that right? You can go through the renderings real quick.
Render. Like that? So that's a line drawing I was referring to before. These?
Yeah, all of them.
Okay.
Just get an idea of how it looks.
Right, so this is with the metal rib, I think, shown. And again, this is from Sandusky and Spring. Maybe it helps to see it on the big screen. Northeast side, so you're kind of right at the corner of the building. And again, it's showing it flat right next to it, but you got a picture of the grade up to the museum, in the museum parking lot here. Northwest rendering. And this is the metal panel. Showing some angled parking on the street, which isn't there currently, but you know, a little bit of license. I think it does give you, the computer design does give you a lot to think about. It's a lot easier than just pen and ink line drawings. I think that was it. Did you have more in your?
No, that's the same.
Okay. I think they ought to come up and you ought to have to
Okay, yeah,
continue your
let's,
discussion.
Any questions for city staff before we do that?
Yeah,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman,
Nyson?
I do have one. Thank you. In the packet, staff, you mentioned some comment about exploring enhancements to the streetscape on Spring Street. I just wonder if you could offer any additional thoughts on what the city's thinking is on that.
I can. I think we're kind of like you and the applicant. We're just at a conceptual stage here and really thinking about more and more of this Sandusky to Franklin Street frontage more than anything. And as we kind of sit on the street and look at it, it's not, streetscape wasn't, the bricks and the light poles weren't extended down there.
Mhm.
It definitely feels there's a little bit of tree lawn for part of it on the north side, but it's just a little bit of grass. There are a lot of driveways that are just paved. It's hard to tell the difference between the road and the sidewalk and the parking lots. So our thinking was a project like this could present an opportunity to really maximize the project in terms of trying to make that streetscape a little more green, a little more pedestrian friendly. Maybe you, like you see in here, maybe utilize, maybe one of the ways to do that, really given the street configuration that we have, is bump outs. I don't know if you guys all know what a bump out is, but that is a bump out, what we would call a bump out into the street that would be green and be have an ability to kind of reestablish a street tree row, if you will.
Yeah, similar to what you have on Sandusky, I think.
Yeah, yes, and it also creates more of the, you can park there today, so it's not like it takes up any travel lane, but it gives you the perception of the road being a little bit narrower, and it helps to calm the traffic a little bit and that sort of thing. There's good studies about that. But I think that's sort of what we're thinking about, is that that's a way to kind of create this streetscape look in a way that is responsive to Spring Street. Doesn't necessarily have to be slavishly just taking the streetscape design from almost 20 years ago at this point and bopping it down there. And to an extent, in front of the Hamwell parking lot, now they come up quite a grade. They have about a shoulder wall there. And then they have landscaping and trees, and they've even made little, well, they're big, kind of tree pods that come out for part of it. So that is sort of establishes a little bit of a tree row, even though it's not in the traditional tree row. But it's a little responsive to the grades that they have out there. So that's kind of what we're thinking about. Where obviously we see the parking lots across the street and looking at opportunities to maximize the amount of parking we can get just in downtown generally. But certainly for this use, and that would be a matter at the end of the day for zoning and that, the zone change and the development plan to deal with. But you have to get cars in and out of those lots too. The bump outs may facilitate that in a safe way. That's also looks better. That's kind of what we're thinking.
Okay.
Just one suggestion when you do get to that point, understanding it's just conceptual, but next to a 6-story building, these punky little crabapple trees that we seem to can't get enough of downtown. Be nice to put something, maybe something, a modest sized tree that actually would have some height to it. It might actually give people a little shade during the summer, and walking down the sidewalk. So,
I'm definitely writing
parts of
down.
the honey locusts.
Definitely write down no punky crab apple.
Take that, Shade Tree Commission.
Any other questions for staff?
Nope.
If not, the applicants are here. I'll just turn it over, let you guys talk, ask questions of the applicants. It's informal, so however we want to approach it's fine.
David, can you put up one of the renderings?
While he's doing that, first of all, thank you very much for coming in front of us again, the changes you made. I think I really appreciate it. I think you've listened to what the commission had to say last time, and I'm anxious to kind of hear the behind the scenes on your designs.
Which one you want? You want this?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, we need name and
You can
address.
Excuse
Yeah,
me,
sure.
we also have to do, I know you've been here before, but you still do the name and address when you get us on.
It's good. What do you want? If you don't like this purple.
So hello, my name is Warren Back. I'm an architect out of Columbus, Ohio. Our exact address is 580 North 4th Street.
And the other gentleman.
Presentation down.
Oops, sorry.
David Kozar with Indus Hotels. My home address 2700 Camden Road, Columbus, Ohio, 43221.
Thank you.
So basically, I'll just go through kind of what we heard and how we tried to respond to it. Largely, I think what you were saying was that it didn't feel quite contextual enough to you. It wasn't quite, it felt really tall, somewhat flat and modern. And so we were looking for ways to try and break down that scale. First of all, how do you get it back into context? Trying to incorporate this Madison blend brick, which is kind of like a soft rose. It seems like it kind of fits in pretty nicely with the palette of Delaware. And so then once we felt like we had a color palette, it was about how do we break the building down in its scale and add some masonry details that are still doable in modern construction, but can still add to the building. And so you can see there's a lot of horizontal moves to try and break down the scale. The building has kind of a base, a middle, and a top now, where before it was just kind of a base and a top. So that kind of also helps break down the height of it. We've added some brick pilasters that go up, kind of create almost like brick columns, and create some depth to it. There's basically 3 bands that go across the building. On the base, we've added some reveals, so it has like a quarter size reveal that goes back, just to kind of give it almost like a cut stone look. Again, trying to break down that scale and create horizontal lines. As far as the porte cochere was, before it was kind of modern and out of place for the context. We went back and looked at what was at the Allen, and we're not trying to replicate what was there, but we're trying to pick up on those proportions. Something that's kind of thin, has that kind of like a metal feel to it, but it's still light, kind of hangs out over there, just like the porte cochere did there. It just doesn't have all the kind of lacy ironwork that was on the original.
Do you have any detailed, closer drawings of that?
Of the new one, or
The new one, yeah. I didn't see it in the packet, and I know sometimes we don't get
It's-
everything.
We don't have, where'd I end up?
Oh, you gotta go. Hey, check it out.
I found the end of the sidewalk.
Oh, the end of the.
You can put mine up if you want. It's
Oh,
got,
yeah, well,
might be easier.
oh, you want your,
Well, I mean, it has basically the same stuff, but it might
no, that's fine.
be easier to move
Yeah, the
around.
packet, it was somewhat difficult to really see
With
it.
this?
Yeah, that's it. So I don't have a lot of close-up details to it right now, but basically it has like a 3/5 concrete foot base to it. Still light and spindly, and then it has some light steel columns that go into that. And the porte cochere itself is just kind of lined with steel channels. And so the profile is basically 6 and a 12 on top to give it that thickness and to allow it to span out.
And the roof of it is metal? It's a metal roof on the porte cochere?
I probably think the roof's probably going to be like an EPDM. Yeah. So the back button doesn't work, does it? Let's see. There it goes.
Should.
Just pushing the back button. So on the end here, we were looking for ways to fill in the blankness of it. I was thinking a painted sign would be a good place there. And I do see some of these downtown Delaware, and it was pretty common at the time. It's also a point where the building kind of peaks up over everything, so it just seemed like a good spot to try and create something different, add some color. For instance, there, we were approaching all the metals being kind of an antique bronze, kind of like a dark brown. It was kind of a color that we started to see in Delaware when we were walking around. As far as the metal panel, I like the way this fits in. I feel like it breaks down the scale of the middle part, just having those segments that kind of go vertically when the rest of the building is horizontally. The windows just kind of fit into it seamlessly. It seemed like a nice way to break up the building a bit.
And that's going to be like an architectural bronze too?
That would be the antique bronze as
Because
well.
it's hard to, it looks black on our reprint. That's why I was asking.
Yeah, no, it's intended to be the same color as all the other metals. So
Okay.
it has that brown. So it all kind of matches.
Okay.
And that would have vertical ribbing, is that?
Correct.
And that same finish would be on the, I'm not even going to try and say it, on the
Sure.
awning,
Yes.
as we say here in
Yeah.
Ohio.
Yeah, I've seen that all the trim is basically that color.
I just call it canopy. I know we're not supposed to do that downtown, but.
French accent. here,
We
okay.
did beef up the cornice as well.
I mean, I would say definitely, we're attentive listeners at the last meeting, because I think, a lot of the concerns that I had, and I think some of the other members look like they've been addressed. I think this is a much more harmonious, building, compared to the previous one. A couple things, just the two things that I guess in the packet that I was going to mention. I guess I'm not as fond of the metal siding in the center section as I think, to me, I think brick would look more, I guess, consistent with the downtown. I don't know, anybody that's been around town for a long time probably remember that one of the buildings used to look, pretty much like that. They did probably a 1950s, modernization where they essentially chiseled off all of the terracotta ornamentation and limestone ornamentation and put something very similar in a different palette up. To me, personally, that kind of looks just a little bit, almost too modern with what to me looks like a really good aesthetic for the rest of the building. I think you guys have done a tremendous job with, with the project overall. The other thought I had too is on the west elevation where you've got the ghost windows on half of it, but not the back half. The back half, was that done for aesthetics, or is that a thought that it's not as visible? Because coming down that street yesterday, actually, and looking at the site, it still is very visible when you approach it from Spring Street on the west, or if you're in, no, on the west side.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So, to me, I mean, is there an imperative in your design for not having the ghost windows on the entire west side or on that southwest portion?
Yeah, I just didn't think it would be really visible.
Yeah, I think if you go down take a look. I think when you go down, it's just because it's a parking lot in front of it and it's such a a tall building. I think it is going to be very visible.
Okay.
I think particularly going forward with a project like this, as you bring more excitement and energy to that section of the downtown, it's going to get more traffic as well. And I think, to me, it just looks, I wouldn't say it looks terrible, but I just think it would look better if you continue the ghost windows on the entire elevation.
Okay.
And then the only other comment I had, I know I used up a lot of oxygen, regarding the setback in the previous meeting, and again, just spending a little more time looking at the site. And I think in the context of the Ham Will building, as well as the setback from Spring Street up the Ross Center, I don't think I would, although I spoke a lot, I think last time about having it set, up to the sidewalk, I don't really have a problem with the setback. And I understand the practicality of having the drop-off area. So those are my three comments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I would just in many ways just kind of echo what was said. I think as an overall look, to use a baseball metaphor, it's baseball season, you've hit it out of the park on this. Particularly the color palette, the horizontal banding, and I think the overall sense of the building as it's currently presented, it has the feel of an old industrial warehouse. So I can imagine if we were to put this anywhere else in the downtown and someone were to come in here from out of town, they would look like, oh, you repurposed a building. That's great. So I'm very, very satisfied with that. Sort of as was mentioned, I prefer the brick in the middle personally. For the same reasons. I don't know of anywhere else in the downtown currently that has any kind of a metal vertical look to it. I think it would just sort of be jarring a bit. Where I like the different color for that middle section, but I like the brick. And again, I would echo the same thoughts regarding the west elevation. I think just maintaining the symmetry on the east and west would make more sense to me as an aesthetic point. But again, I think this is a really incredible enhancement, and I think it would fit in very well. So thanks.
Well, I agree also. With the brick inset, and the ghost windows, I think would probably be smart to continue that on that section of the building, but great job. Very nice.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening.
I also agree with all the comments that it was handled very well. I actually don't think that you need additional ghost windows on that back portion. It is a bump out, correct? So it has it's a different form. And sometimes there can be too much going on. So a little bit of a pause there is not a bad thing, I don't think. And I agree that the brick overall would fit in best with the context. But the metal panel has its strengths as well, but probably in this context, the brick.
Sure, I understand. Yeah, that's why we brought both of them.
Yeah.
You know, I like the metal panel better, but does that really exist in Delran?
I know, it's good to always throw it out there.
Mr. Rohr?
Mr. Chairman, can I have one idea?
Yep.
Since we're just spitballing, on that west elevation.
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
We just wanted to know how you feel about the brick that we did bring.
Do you want to just start with sharing?
Sure.
Pass them around.
It's an iron spot. We like it with the texture, but that, you know, whether or not you guys do, we're curious to hear it.
You want to pass your main body around too?
So on the Madison blend brick, is that also more of a smooth glazed finish or?
No, it's not a.
Okay, a little more of a rough texture.
They're different colors. So this one's kind of more blue. This one's got like a reddish.
Okay, I see now. There's a different one for this.
This is the limestone base, but we're looking at more like a smooth finish.
All right. So we've got vertical score. This is dark, this is manganese. And manganese smooth and dark smooth.
Oh, sorry.
All right. And this is the side of the limestone.
Yeah, it's like a buffet.
It's the granite, right? Limestone, rather? Limestone? As well. Have that.
I guess one thing, I kind of like the way the red and the brick picks up the red and the dark iron spot, I guess.
Yeah, kind of.
It also ties a little bit, I think, with the architectural bronze from the metal trim and.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of,
I want to say.
I don't really have, I mean, I could go with either the smooth or the texture. I kind of like the texture better, but I think either would be fine. But I do think picking up a little bit of that red would be.
Yeah.
kind of nice.
Does the texture creating kind of a maintenance problem beyond the?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
Not on the dark brick.
Staining or.
Which one are you talking about there?
The texture.
See, that's got a little bit of red. Actually, that one does too.
Yeah.
Both the iron spots.
I think I like the texture of
The darker.
I do too, because I think that's gonna like keep it from being super shiny, next to the, to the finish of the red brick.
It gives it a stronger sense of depth because there's not the same reflection, which
Yeah.
is what we're looking for.
Right. Yeah, we thought the texture would really
Yeah.
feel pretty cool.
It's nice.
And the rest, the faux limestone and those things are all precast, or is that what you?
Well, the limestone is a precast stone, but
You guys want to get a bit closer look.
Okay, I asked, because like at the county building we use, Dave, what's the technical term for the fake limestone that they use? EPS or something like that?
Well, they use, they use like a smooth face concrete.
No, it's like for their cornices and stuff, that's
the
the
cornice.
man-made.
Glass fiber reinforced.
Yeah, up top it is.
Yeah. So in this case, you're not using that, it would be Like with your, what are, well, let me just ask you, where your cornices? made?
The cornice, we were just thinking antique metal.
Okay, all
And
right,
we also thought that that would be antique bronze.
okay, yeah, I like that.
Is it supposed to look like?
And
No, it's just supposed to have a texture.
That would be not a concern, but something that we would want to keep in mind is that what these renderings are showing are really nice details, especially in the limestone base, and those reveals add a lot of depth. But I know when you start to think of a project, it's exactly those kind of details that go away. So I just want to throw that out there, that we are pleased with this as it is. We understand that there is back and forth as the project goes, but we would still be looking for the quality of those details.
Is there a thought, now, you were proposing the smooth face?
I like smooth textures personally.
Is there a thought on that for the limestone like base?
Yeah.
So your the little call out of the material has smooth face above
Is that,
face. Is that happening or not happening?
that is not gonna happen. It's easy to make happen.
So is
I was
this,
just curious if it was going to be a mixture of the two, smooth at the top and.
I was
split at the
thinking it's
bottom.
more of a monolithic look, kind of like
Okay,
a Capitol building.
okay, I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was intending more of a monolithic.
For what it's worth.
So this
I think
sample-
that's the look on the museum.
okay, so this sample would be,
The backside.
but you're saying smooth, so would the smooth actually look more like that than the,
Right.
okay. Everybody,
Okay. Right, so the little, rendering, I guess, that detail where it's kind of like the ashlar or the rough stuff below and the smooth above, it would actually all be smooth.
I prefer it all smooth, but it can be done that way. It's just a matter of where would you stop the rough? Start the smooth without breaking down.
I mean, just,
the weight.
I'm not sure it's gonna keep me up nights one way or the other. I guess to the extent that the rougher, might somewhat mimic a foundation. And then the smooth, the more finished look, but, personally, I'm not sure.
I guess my only opinion about it is I feel like that base band doesn't want to get any smaller. And so if we break it up, we're either going smooth, if we went smooth and rough, suddenly we create a line in the middle of it. And it starts to feel a little bit lighter, or a little bit almost like too light compared to the other bands that are happening. It's nice that it's the same proportion as the one that's on top. So if you like rough, maybe it's all rough, or if you like smooth, it's all smooth. But I feel like mixing the two together is a little bit tough with these proportions.
I think too, we could think, what are the historic precedents downtown that we might mimic in that regard? I'm trying to think of,
You don't have a lot.
I don't have a lot.
I've been impressed that the museum post office probably has the most of it of just about anything.
actually, Dave, were you able to load the photos I sent you?
Yeah.
the few that I can think of, they're probably more granite, but there's more of a smooth look, right?
Actually, I took some pictures. I was up at the theater in Marion and took some pictures of the Hotel Harding, which is right across the street. And that does have a lot of, obviously, this is an old building. And I took the pictures, and there's a few of them. There's one from a little bit farther away that I think gives you a sense of scale. So this is I'm about a block to a block and a half away, and it's obviously uphill somewhat. And that's probably about the same size of our normal 3-story building downtown next to it. Again, the scale's off a little bit, and that is a bigger footprint. And then if you kind of move in to go back, that's a big building. That's a 7 to 8-story building. So if you kind of lop off that top, you get a sense of the scale that we're looking at. To to me, that kind of hit home because I did spend some time walking around down there, and computer graphics always kind of throw you off a little bit. I think you've done a great job of breaking this up, but make no doubt, this is a big, big building. This will be the biggest building in Delaware. It just happens to not be on top of a hill like the courthouse is. So I appreciate the work that's gone into that. I think, to me, when you think of probably an old hotel with semi-Italianate, I probably am off on what you consider that to be, but it's about in the time period of most of our downtown. That doesn't look all that different from the Hotel Allen. The Hotel Allen might have been a little more ornate, but it's still that kind of red brick. So I think we're tying, to think about building something there. I think the red brick ties in well. I think the sandstone, limestone tie in well. I like breaking up the front of it. I'm still concerned because it's a really, really big building, but that's outside of our purview. So I just happened to be up there and snap some photos just because we had some old ones of the hotel here, but I thought this was a really appropriate idea of what an original downtown, a grand downtown hotel would look like.
Dave, can you flip back to the one that was like a block and a half away? Because I think, to your point, Mark, you mentioned, if you lop off the top part of it, that's about what the scale's going to look like. Then.
Probably,
and
yeah.
I mean,
the only problem is there are no other 3-story buildings around it. So
that's
kind of
the biggest thing when I got the packet last month and I opened it up and saw 6 stories was, whoa, again, that is a very big building. But I think, this where it's sitting relative to the main core, or the core historic district, its proximity to the Ham Will building, which is a pretty prominent building. And I hate to lose the view of it from Sandusky, but I think, the line drawing kind of shows it in that context. I know until you see it for real, it's probably, almost a leap of faith, going by the computer, renderings and the line drawings. But just, looking at the packet, it's not nearly as jarring or hulking as I thought it would be, particularly with the changes, that the applicants have made to the design to bring it more in, harmony with the rest of the downtown.
And for what it's worth, I agree with pretty much what everybody else has said. I did want to call out, I actually liked the little, it's not a ghost sign, but I think it kind of pays homage to ghost signs in the corner. I thought that was kind of a neat touch. My request would be that Hampton, I think their corporate colors are blue. I'd rather it not be a blue sign. It would be awesome if it can just kind of be black and white like you showed it in there. But yeah, I like what you've done. I think you've listened to our suggestions. Obviously, there's all sorts of hurdles you got to clear on this, and this is just one of them. But
yeah, I'm glad you brought the sign up, because and I agree 100% with what you just said about the sign, but we also have to look at that in the context of the current standards. Obviously the variances, and I'm just wondering if the difference between this and some previous applicants is that this is new build, so it's not, we're not painting over historic, fabric. So maybe that's the differentiation between, the discussion we're having right now about that signage versus the discussion we had a month ago about the Cohatch signing.
Well, and just like that discussion, this sign, in my opinion, could be executed on, if you wanted, on a backer board. It makes it look exactly the same and sets on the side of the building, doesn't have to offset very much at all. And you get the same looks without painting the brick. It's obviously, it's not historic brick, it's new brick.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I especially agree with the comment on colors, though. I think, blue might be a little bit too jarring. Black, it actually would kind of look like a ghost sign, a very vivid ghost sign. But, I think of the Smith Brothers downtown, something, like that. I mean, that's certainly historic. signage, but it's, black with white lettering, and it looks really good, and it doesn't look out of place at all.
As a reminder too, for a final submission, we'd also would want to see about lighting on the sign and other places you might have out exterior lighting too.
Any other thoughts, comments? I do have a question for city staff.
I do have one question
Yes.
back to Ms. Herring's point, and you see it here, the, on the limestone in particular, the horizontal lines of reveal,
Yeah.
whether it's, sounds like smooth is the consensus, but you mentioned that it was important to keep it showing very shadowy here, and we don't know what that reveal is, but you mentioned that's important
It is, yeah.
for you at least to see that.
That detail actually with this material isn't that hard to pull off because the company that does the limestone, they have certain sizes. One of them is like a 24-inch block, and then they also have one that's only a 4-inch. So my thought was we could do the 24s, put the 4-inch in between them, recess it back, half an inch, 3/4, and that creates that look. So it doesn't really add a lot of cost for us in that kind of case. It's not like we're cutting reveals into it or anything like that. So those details I think will be easy to get into it. It's some of the other ones are. She's right.
Then the other question I had was just, I think the renderings make the cornice to me feel as if it's projecting out quite a bit. I don't know how far the thought was in some of the other drawings. It doesn't feel like it's projecting out that far. When the courthouse came through, we just keep talking about that, I think, because that was the last big new building in downtown. How far are we, and maybe that's just me reacting that way, but I want to know when we're going into final about if there's a sense of that the courthouse really projected quite a lot. Here, I just can't tell.
On the elevations, it looks like, it's a pretty substantial cornice, but it looks certainly, to me, it looks in proportion to the rest of the building, whatever, it's.
See, this drawing feels to me as if it's not projecting out from the otherwise face of the building as far as the computer
So
rendering, but
the other thing is they're made from the same model. It's just a matter of.
I know.
The lighting.
Listen, I understand. That's why I'm asking the question, just so we're all,
And I think that's a good point.
just so we're all clear.
I promise you, I have not played any tricks.
I guess how far were you thinking it
Like, how do you
projected?
know how
Yeah.
far it projects?
I wish I remembered. I'm looking at it right now, and I can say that the top band of that course on the windows, the header, is 8 inches, and it looks like we have about 2 of those for the projection. So it looks like it's about 16 inches of projection
And that's horizontal, we're saying?
horizontally.
Okay.
Is that?
It's probably 18 inches to 2 foot.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of detail that'd be called out in the final submission, I would assume.
Sure.
And is that far enough or not far enough for just, I know you're trying to think 16 inches and look at this
7
and
stories up.
kind of putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, to me, visually, the elevations, to me, it looks fine.
Yeah, but I guess my thinking is if you're at the ground, you're looking up 7 levels, you want it to be pronounced. You want to be able to see that it is projecting. Whatever that would end up being, it's hard to say. Not being the architect and all, but
Yeah, it looks
Trying to
like it's
remember
a
what the courthouse had to be 3 or 4 feet in some places. It's pretty pronounced on, not every elevation, but on some.
Yeah.
Are you saying that the end result ended up to be more than was expected from the?
No, we had a lot of
Just asking.
conversation about all parts of that building. That was one of them, to
Okay.
try to bring the height, in particular, I think, on the Sandusky Street side down, because talk about grade. When you're back on the 23 side, it's probably about as tall, I've measured it, and I don't recall, up as this building they're talking about, but you have significant grade down there.
Did you actually go by the 1/15
I
rule
did.
the guidelines. So,
On
that- okay.
height.
So the
I don't know that there was a guideline for as far as.
No, I don't think there is, but if we look at the height, we know that according to our guidelines, the height of it should be in proportion to the overall building. And then the angle that it comes out would be in proportion to that height. So I think it should be good.
I think it's hard to think about, how big something is. It would be, I think it's easier to look at it and say, does that feel right? Because it is, the 6 stories. Does that portion feel right, or does it feel small, or? Is it jumping off the face of the building?
Definitely makes it easier for me when we get into a final approval on details like this, that you have those called out at least in call outs,
Sure.
so that then as we project, you got a lot of process, but assuming you get through and you get all the approvals you need, that we get to a building permit inspection, and I know what I'm supposed to have my guys inspect to make sure that was built that way. So there are kind of rendering versus reality of construction surprises. There's going to be some things during the process of construction, no doubt.
So I only have one last comment, and I'm not saying this is a good idea or a bad idea, but since this is the last opportunity we'll have before your official submission, regarding that west elevation, there was some differing opinions on whether or not there should be a full, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 5 rows of 3 infilled fake windows on each of those different sections. I was thinking, another thing I wanted to put out there as an idea is I've seen on other warehouses and things like that where it's actually very asymmetrical, and maybe you'll have a couple here and then one over here and a couple up there and some others down there. And I just thought I'd throw that out there as another possibility. If you wanted something that was unique and different looking, that wasn't just repetitive, you could always think about that possibility. But I don't know what the rest of the commission thinks. I don't even know what I think for sure, but I thought I'd put it out there as an idea. Judging from the
Did you have any comments or thoughts on?
rickets, I'm
I
guessing.
actually did that first, but I thought it was too far out there.
Yeah.
Yes, I love it personally, but I feel like it feels a little modern to me.
Fair enough.
Okay. Anything else from members? I do have a question then for staff, just process. So is their next step to come back here for final approval, or do they do council planning council? Walk us through, if you
And
would.
again, at the end of the day, it's an applicant's choice as to how they want to pursue that process. We can recommend to them ways to do it that make sense, that have been successful in the past. And that recommendation is come through with final through HPC. And most applicants want to know that, so they know what they have in terms of the building.
Okay.
And then start the other processes. And I think that's what they've expressed they would like to do, is roll right into probably a submission here for final formal approval for a certificate of appropriateness at the September meeting. So I did want to bring that up anyway, so I appreciate the question. And that will allow them to then kind of know what they have in that regard and be able to have lots of other discussions about zoning and processes and parking and all that kind of stuff. So, unless you've changed your mind since yesterday, I think that's what we're talking about.
Okay.
Makes sense to me. It's
Okay. Thank you. I think we're out of questions if you're out of answers. Very much appreciate your time again, not just tonight, but all the time that you put in since our last meeting, and look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you all.
All right, thank you.
It's everywhere. Yeah, that's great.
No, it's everywhere.
Not enough hands.
Give them water break.
No. You want to run out the road? Go ahead, take one.
Around.
Go run out this.
Pass it down. Nah, I'm right.
All right. Nope. No, we'll take anybody water break or something, that's fine. Okay,
No, I'm good.
all right. Next item on the agenda, 4B, is again an informal request. This is a request by Sandusky Brothers LLC for an informal review for the proposed building renovation at 17 North Sandusky Street, which is Zone B2, Central Business District, and located in the downtown core of the Downtown Historic District overlay. Staff, do you have a report?
I do. Brief one. This is at 17 North Sandusky Street. It's the west side of Sandusky between William and Winter. Currently zoned B2, Downtown Commercial District. It is in the downtown core sub-district. Aerial photograph, should we need it, and I think it kind of highlights just the differences in these buildings and the additions through the years that, line drawings don't necessarily highlight as well, but you can really see it at this oblique angle a little bit, probably a little bit easier in your packet to see that. The applicant is before us tonight with some potential changes, interior and exterior. Obviously, HPC has jurisdiction over the exterior ones, but sometimes interior changes lead to the necessity for changes on the exterior, and I'll let Zach get into some of those discussions. We did do a facade grant for this building within the last 5 years, and that kind of unentombed some of the windows on the north side of that structure. Zach's aware of this, and so there are some requirements with respect to that grant that we're not changing what the grant was to produce the result that the grant produced. And so he's aware of that. I think that time period is sort of the exclusion to change it period is coming up here in the next year or so. But they're trying to think about how they might arrange this building on the interior and therefore on the exterior as well. So I really let Zach go through his ideas and get some more feedback from you. I think they're at a very early stage in this process. So if that makes you go forward, that makes the spotlight that Councilman Rohr hates, so don't use that.
So use it often.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks. I'm Zach Price with Triad Architects and also one of the owners of this building. My address is 328 North Liberty Street here in Delaware. So we're largely looking at this as a restoration project, although because of the age of the building, of course, it's gone through numerous changes. But really our goal is to, right now, we're trying to do an economic analysis as to what makes sense here. So we just finished up a building that's almost the exact same size, same condition, nearly an identical project in Columbus. So we've got good numbers on that, but of course the kind of economic realities in Columbus are different than here. So, but that's largely, driving what would happen on the interior of the building, not necessarily at the exterior. Our goals for the exterior right now are largely to restore the building. And as part of our analysis that we're going through, we are assessing whether it makes sense to pursue federal and state historic tax credits on this. So with the federal and state historic tax credits, the period of significance is looking back 50 years. So if these photos, I honestly can't recall I don't know the dates on these photos. I've actually had some difficulty finding great photos of that side of the street. I guess the other side was a lot more popular.
You can always guess by the car, but it could be a 20-year-old car the guy's driving around.
Right. So the proposed east elevation there on the right, we are interested in, restoring the brick, removing the paint. If, that becomes an easy process. We've done that on other projects, and it really just kind of depends on the age and type of the paint. So some places we've been really successful with that, and others have been difficult. But ideally, we would like to take it back to the brick. Removing the cornice. So the building, in some of the older photos, there appears to originally have been a cornice. Also the coping at the top where it steps up, at one point had a kind of like a triangle on top, and that's changed. It appears numerous times since the building was built. So looking back 50 years, there was no cornice up there. And from what we could tell, the photos that we found show a pretty significant length of time where there was no cornice there. The cornice that is there now is in pretty rough shape. Not that that really necessitates its removal per se, but it was added sometime in the mid to late 70s, is my understanding. From what I've been told, was to make the building look more historical. So, but we're proposing removing that and then restoring the brick up there, as well as the what appears to be a stone coping on top of there. The third floor, second and third floor, we would look at replacing the windows. Right now, the windows that are there are an aluminum, looks like kind of, I don't know, 70s or so off the shelf window. There's also, we haven't really done invasive investigation on those window jambs, but it appears that the windows that are in there now may not have been the original size. That my guess is maybe they were an off-the-shelf window, and then that original window was framed in a little bit to accommodate those windows that are there now. And then you can, unfortunately, there's not a, can I zoom in here?
I don't know how to do that. I don't think you can with that.
Okay. So the, on the proposed east elevation, you might see it better in the packet, but the proposed elevation there, you'll notice that the jambs, it's a narrower profile, and that's because my guess right now is that there is a metal that's wrapping around those jambs. So that's what led me to think that there was something that reduced the size of those windows, and then it was just wrapped with a brake metal at one point. But
when you say reduced, do you think that they actually added brick and then painted at the same time to kind of shrink those down, or do you think they just wrapped metal around it?
They just wrapped metal.
Inches?
So it's in the existing east facade there, which you might see better in the packet.
Mm-hmm.
You can see there's a wider, so a wider, like that red band, that's metal.
Okay.
In the photographs of the 1960s photographs, it looks like those jambs are pretty prominent at that point, and they're painted the same color, or they are the same color as the sills and the header. So you think potentially those jambs are not original, but yet they may be there in the 1960s. I guess. Do you have any sense of those aluminum, the images from the 1960s? You can't tell anything about these windows.
It's honestly very difficult to tell.
It is. I guess that's the only thing I want to point out is that in the 1960s images, it looks like there's still significant jams.
Right. Yeah, and I can't say, and I don't necessarily have, I mean, if I don't necessarily have a preference, really. I mean, the windows that we would likely look at replacing these with are probably an aluminum clad wood window. We've been looking at, there's a Pella and Marvin both make an architectural series, which I believe the National Park Service actually is allowing right now for
They are.
Okay,
And
so,
Pella has worked with the National Park Service on making appropriate windows.
yeah, we've done, I mean, I've probably restored over 100 wood windows, and I know Pella's been knocking at our door for a long time. And Marvin makes the comparable window too, and they have the larger bottom sill and the stiles, or the butts, the bottom butts into the side of the stiles. So they're nice windows. Plus, I think they're easier to maintain and look better 5 to 10 years down the road. And then going down to the first floor, as Dave said, we understand that storefront was redone as part of a facade grant project. And I think it might be May or so of next year that might be coming up on its 5-year term limit. It's unlikely that we would do anything before that time, particularly if we apply for historic tax credits, since the next chance we would have to do that would be in the spring, which wouldn't allow us to even start any construction until I think it's June or July at the earliest. But that, let's see here. I'll just flip to the head a little bit here. So looking at the first floor plan, as it affects that storefront, we are looking at a new entrance on the north end of that storefront. And they're actually, I haven't been able to get a photo from the Historical Society, but there are photos that show that there was an entrance in that exact location when it was the U.S. store. And one of the things that allows, that works out very well, is that if we end up dividing these into 2 separate tenants, is that actually allows us the opportunity to provide accessible ADA access into that space, because the sidewalk actually meets the floor level at that north end, and then it slopes down.
So at
from
the
there.
center stair, there would be a step. So
There is a
it would be
step at the
accessible.
center, so it's not accessible, right? Sorry?
Is east on the left side of that picture?
Yes. So the other thing
That's
is,
west, right?
West.
West is on the left.
Flip back to that.
the east, yeah, the east side of the building is on the right there. The west side of the building is where you see sorry, I used to think I hate, but this is the west side here with the parking lot, and then the east side over here, Sandusky Street, right here. So, and so there's actually, if you, well, I've just been trying to get a copy of it, but inside of the antique store right now, they have actually some old photos hanging behind the cash register, and they actually do show that door there. And I know it's really difficult to tell in some of the photos in the packet. And I have some of the photos on my laptop as well, and it's still hard to tell even at higher resolution, but that there were 2 more distinct storefronts when there were 2 different stores there. And then I don't know if it was part of the facade grant or prior to that, that cornice was created and made consistent all the way across. So 'cause originally they were more very different storefronts there. And then the center door,
That was long before our facade grant.
That was what, the 1970s?
okay, okay.
Well, the facade grant just kind of unintuned some of the detailing, basically on the right side, on the north side of
The prism glass and the
and
restaurant.
also around some of the center doors.
Okay.
And is it true that the tile base is original too, and that was uncovered?
I believe so.
Okay. I think that's what I
Yeah, it shows up in this photo here on the left. I don't know if it's the exact same tile. The tile that's there right now it's pretty like a high gloss tile, which seems more modern to me, but maybe they were ahead of their time, I guess.
I remember right.
It's not, I don't know what happened to it.
If I remember right, the tile was tying back to the 1920s or something, I'm trying to remember
We
back.
had that Carrera glass stuff around down there.
Yeah.
We had it in front of the Strand, and
Strand
that got
had it.
changed out with some of that.
Hamburger Inn.
Hamburger
Yeah.
Inn has, I imagine it,
On page 3 of the packet, the picture of the restaurant, you can see what looks like it was that tile, and that's made at 1931.
Yeah. I think it was at
So
20s,
if it
30s.
wasn't, if it, unless at some point somebody replaced the old block tile with new block tile.
And that's also when the restaurant came along, if I remember right, they're in that air-conditioned picture, right, in the early 1930s, late 20s. I remember, it says that in the packet, anyway.
And the tile isn't something that it's not something that we're really looking to replace. I mean, we're fine with that.
So the only fundamental change that seems on the first floor then is the door, the new door, and then just changing the color scheme a bit on the bottom. Is that pretty much it?
It is, and I mean, the color is not we're not really stuck on any particular color. We felt that the colors that are there right now, if we kept those same colors and removed the paint from the brick, then it didn't look very good.
Yeah.
As far as colors in the elevation, it's fine. It's not, there's no specifics to it, but I mean, in general, direction.
Right.
And the lintels are currently painted?
Yes, they are. Yeah.
The new door, there, you have seen a photograph of historically a door there. Was it a recessed door? Did it create a vestibule, or was it on the face? Do you know? Or can you tell?
It's hard to tell. The old photographs that I have seen, which I'll try and get copies of, but it was a very different storefront. It was actually a much taller storefront with a larger cornice to it.
Yeah.
And then, in fact, I don't know that there were actually two center doors there originally either. So the photo on the top left was another building of ours in Columbus, and we had a very similar situation. Although on that building, there was no door, and we were required to put that door in just to meet our egress requirements. There wasn't really any other way around it. So what we did was we did where it steps back there, we did a butt glazing so that it looks like you've still got two large pieces of plate glass. And then when you're inside of the space, then you look out and you can't even see the joint. So it looks like you're still looking through two windows. So that's one way we thought we could treat it. But in this particular case, since there was originally a door there and it was a much different storefront, then I guess we're open to
So an alternative
whatever.
would be to go off that mullion and do a diagonal piece of glass, which back to the door. Does that make sense? So instead of,
So this is, if I keep going to this, so this is showing, keeping these three
Right.
windows here, and then this line right here, which we try to line up with that vertical piece in the prism glass, is that line could be a butt joint where it turns back.
but the alternative is to use the original mullion and then do glass diagonally back to that point, as opposed to opposed to do the butt glazing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that would work too.
Would you be opposed to that? Do you have a
No, I'm not really.
preference one? way or
I'm
the other?
not really opposed to anything.
Okay.
The exterior of this building and to us seems fairly straightforward, and where it gets more complicated, it's on the interior. And then we're really looking at the economics of what to do there.
Go ahead, please. You probably will cover it.
So the back of the building, there were what appears to be 3 additions put on this building. So you can see the 3-story building there with the brick on the back. The brick at some point was sandblasted, so it needs a bit of work, but our goal there is just to treat it as a restoration project. There's also some work that needs to happen up at the roof there. And then we'll be looking at similar replacement windows on the back as well. There is a fire escape right now in that west facade from the roof photo. The fire escape is barely hanging on there. It's a little bit of a safety concern.
Do you need to have it for the planned usage of the building?
No, we don't. We looked at, from a code standpoint, utilizing the 3rd floor of this building, without getting into, we've looked a little bit at alternative compliance in Chapter 34 of the building code, but likely we'll need to add another stair and an elevator to use the 3rd floor. So that, of course, is a huge expense, which is kind of driving what happens with the 3rd floor. But we did look at trying to fix that. The problem with it is, it's not impossible, but if we were to try and use that fire escape as our second means of egress out of there, we would have to bring that down. We would have to cover it because of the snow and rain. And we've talked with Jerry Warner too, but have to cover that as well as bring it across the rooftop and do a fire rating across the rooftop and then somehow bring it down off the back. So we did look at an option where we have another internal staircase as well, which might work. So the portion in that west facade, the existing photo there, The portion on the left side with the gabled roof is what we can understand is the first addition to the building. Then there was, let's see if I have a roof plan here.
I don't think there is.
No. It's in yeah, so that original three-story building here, first addition here, then there was another addition added right here, and then an addition, the last addition was this piece, and that little bump out might have happened at that time too. So they're all different types of construction. The oldest addition, of course, is the one with the gabled roof. So we're just gonna probably just replace the roof there. It really kind of created a hodgepodge look of these different additions on the back, and we looked at removing the looks kind of like a brutalist style concrete veneer back there, but I mean it's not a really popular style perhaps, but we feel that it does actually tie that together pretty well.
Popular all the time.
So one of the things that we looked at, that bump out, which is on the right side of that proposed elevation, right now there's that bumps out, and on the left side of that, there's a door that goes in to the antique store. There really isn't trash service for all these buildings is an issue. So we looked at using that bump out there as a dumpster enclosure, and then making a new entrance on the left side there. So there's currently a double just hollow metal doors on the back there. So we would look at kind of opening that up with a nicer storefront that in this image, it's not really a historical storefront, but it matches the concrete veneer perhaps more than a historical one would. So.
If I could ask a question about that, the area on, I don't know what page it's on, page 9, I guess, of the application where you have the first floor demolition plan, and it's the area right would be just basically to the east of the area where you're talking about having the trash recycle. You haven't mentioned there as a potential outdoor area, and I haven't heard anybody really talk about that you're talking about demolishing part of an existing building, it sounds like.
Yeah, so, and this is really, we haven't looked for tenants for this space. Mm-hmm. But one thought is that what we're showing there's potential outdoor area is the most recent addition put on the building. It's a concrete block with steel decking and a rubber roof on it. So the shell of that, I mean, it's concrete block, it's in decent shape. The roof needs replaced. One thought we had was if we took that, actually got rid of that, then it could create a walled kind of outdoor, kind of nice landscaped area. Something like an example might be if you're familiar with the Barcelona restaurant patio in Columbus, or another restaurant, Bossi Italia in off of Neal and off of by Goodale Park there. Yeah. So something kind of like that. But I think a future tenant would something that we would like to find is a restaurant that can do something that's very family friendly, that might be able to have some kind of family oriented outdoor area, which I don't think really exists in Delaware right now. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we don't get to go out to dinner very often.
this is true.
Right.
So on the front facade, where you're taking off the 1970s cornice, which, does obviously look weird because it doesn't go up to the top. Is there any thought about somehow replicating, maybe not, verbatim, but, somehow creating a sense of previous cornice on that facade?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I think we're not opposed to that. I don't know. We haven't done research into the, look or material or cost of that. But we, so far we were just looking back at the period of significance
Well,
for
the
this.
reason I ask is, in terms of overall, I think, it's what you're proposing is overall improvement over the current, facade of the building. But with the unfinished, top of the building, it looks kind of like a parapet, but it doesn't, there's most of the buildings downtown that haven't been, screwed up, before, the standards were created, have some level of ornamentation. So it's a pretty plain facade at the top compared to everything else around it. And I'm just wondering that might be an option to at least explore that and see if there might be a way to, again, maybe not necessarily recreate what was there in 1900, but see if there's a way to at least kind of tie back to that and not make it look so utilitarian, the upper story of the building. And again, I say that prefacing it with overall, I think it's an improvement. Like, to me, it looks like an improvement overall, but it just seems like it would be a little plain compared to everything else around it.
Yeah, it would. I mean, we could certainly explore that. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see how it works with, because it does step up.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, it almost looks like, the previous corners on the older, pictures, it was kind of stepped down, where the two steps are, and then it had more of a triangular treatment that,
Right.
Would have at some point, I guess obscured the highest portion of it, the central portion of that facade.
Mm-hmm.
But again, just something that to me seems like it would at least be worth exploring.
Right, and I mean, there are a few old photos of this building, which I don't know. I mean, I don't think there were any photos from the 1850s when it was built.
Sure.
But I do know that typically the buildings pre-Civil War were much more simple, like where Barley Hopsters is, or some of the buildings to the north of this on the same side of the street that were probably pre-Civil War and much more understated. And in the early 1900s, I think
So
a lot of them went
the,
back.
in like the turn of the century photos, those were probably some element that was added, at a later point.
That would be my guess based on kind of the similar types of buildings built in the 1850s up until, the late 1800s.
I guess I'm thinking of the, block of buildings on the corner of William and Sandusky. It's not the Lamb block, is it? No, that's the, I can't remember. But anyway, it's, basically where, or I'm sorry, is it on the corner of
Winter?
Winter, but it's got kind of the triangular cornice
Right.
treatments. And the finials on the end. And again, I'm not saying, that's the look I'm suggesting, but I'm just saying there's one that I think that's a pretty old block of buildings in the downtown that probably, predates a lot of the Italianate structures. And it does have a fair amount of ornamentation on it.
Okay, right.
The Williams block, excuse me.
Okay. And I think there's actually a old photo in the packet that has something similar to that. It's the,
Page 2, I think.
I don't know what, looks like page 2
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, you can just kind of see it.
But again, I mean, that says from the mid-20s too, so. The other thing that's changed from that photo is the roof actually, right in this photo, it was a gabled roof all the way to the
Yeah.
front facade, whereas that's been cut back at some point. So.
If you continue on the path of historic tax credits and grant funding, that becomes kind of a messy area where as soon as you try to recreate something that was historical but is long gone, then that becomes messy. And I guess I don't have a problem with not having the cornice. I mean, it's just historically the structure that is, you're just unearthed structure and you're showing structure instead of cornice that's long gone. And if we don't have accurate photographs of what it did look like, then you're creating something completely new. So it's a completely new thing that you're adding.
They start looking like Powell.
Well, as I say, I think overall, I think that's an improvement, and personally, I want to get hung up on it, but.
I have one question, and it's more of a clarification for city staff, or from city staff, if you know the answers, because I know that under our guidelines about demolition, that there are either of two different criteria that have to be met, whether it's, no features of architectural or historical significance, or no reasonable economic use for the structure as it exists or might be restored, and no feasible or prudent alternatives to demolition. How does that, because that's really applying to the demolition of an entire structure, not a portion of it, which is itself probably not that historical. How has that been interpreted in the past when it's talking about like this section of the building that is newer and not really contributing to the historical nature?
Are you talking about with respect to the cornice or the one addition that's?
Yeah, that addition in the southwest corner.
Beyond the guidelines, I just think that could be kind of cool space for a new restaurant, to be honest with you.
Sure.
Behind the wall, you wouldn't even notice it's gone today from the public way.
Okay.
That'd be my interpretation. I think you would have the latitude to make that kind of interpretation. You could also go right to the guidelines that you read with respect to any other kinds of demolition. It was an addition to this building, although the latest and perhaps not historic, but I think there is probably a question about the historic integrity of that particular addition that you might want to explore for.
Yes.
And we certainly.
From this, but from the picture, and the renderings, I mean, it almost looks contemporaneous with the very back part of it, which doesn't, it almost looks like something that was thrown up in the 70s.
Yeah.
Which,
Well,
we certainly have, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, we recently allowed that at Jack Cahan's Hair Studio,
And
much earlier
Kroger.
up on Lake Street. I think it was a mill. At one point, everything on the back was just old, non-historic. And we've also definitely granted more leeway on areas that were not viewable from the street, were not part of the facade, not part of the original building.
I know we did the old Kroger on William Street too, right after I started on this commission. The back portion of that, the Sherman-Williams.
Right.
Okay.
There was a structure there we took down, we're only approved taking down.
Yeah, so there's definitely,
Jersey Posey.
I think, within the guidelines to do that.
Yeah, all right. I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
I agree aesthetically, I think it sounds great. To have something there that's more of a garden.
So anything else that you want to talk to us about? Anything else, feedback that we can help you with?
I was kind of curious on your thoughts on that west elevation and the potential outdoor space.
I think
It's a pretty, it's a very visible piece right there from the parking lot.
Well, I think trying to make that, because I mean, it's a fairly contemporary looking structure. I think trying to make it look historic would look kind of, I don't know that you can screw that thing up much more than you can only help it maybe.
We tried to make it look a little more historic at first and thought it looked terrible.
Yeah. I think usually what we've looked for in those sort of things is to be sympathetic. So, no mill finished aluminum. You don't want it to look like it's the back of, a loading dock.
Right.
But yeah, you kind of have to play the cards you're dealt and do the best you can with those. It's a little hard on this. I go back there. I don't look at it with the awnings and everything. It's kind of not something that my eye. So now that I'll walk back and take a look at it, I think. The question is that blue? Is that an awning that you have drawn in there?
It is, but
I mean, I get it.
There's awnings there right now.
Yeah.
I think from a staff perspective, I definitely appreciate the nod to trying to account for refuse, particularly back in that location, and doing so without taking up parking spaces as well, and trying to hide it. I know it's, it's not the historic.
It's a good place to park right in front of it too.
Never happened. Never happened back then. That's been a distinct issue back here.
Yeah. It obviously looks better without the fire escape. I think appreciate you replacing the windows with quality windows without changing the openings. If you can get the paint off the brick without tearing up the brick, that's great. I think it's a great project. I agree. Just from a consumer standpoint, that would be a neat space. I mean, I could think of a lot of spaces that have kind of those weird little, I used to live in Old Town, so I'm down this like Yellow Brick has one, Old Town Tavern, just those little kind of urban alcoves. And I think this is even cooler because it used to be a building, so you kind of can, does it have any windows?
It does not now. There are no.
That'd almost be kind of cool.
Now there are windows. The portion on the left there that has the first edition was originally a brick. It is brick. If you go into the antique store, you can and look closely. You can see traces of it. And there were some openings in that wall that at some point were bricked in.
I was thinking more of the newest edition that you're going to tear down and create just kind of a patio in there.
Right.
If you had if it originally had windows that you could open back up, that'd be good.
Yeah, this is the south elevation there. It's not, but it's zero lot line right there.
Yeah, okay.
So I mean, from a code standpoint, I don't think we could get wind. Although it's not I'm not sure from a code standpoint because it's outdoor space. So
right.
I guess when you're thinking about that, Zach, would you keep that exterior wall so you really have an interior kind of courtyard park
Just take
space,
the roof off,
or would
really.
you just take that whole wall off so you're looking at the parking lot?
yeah, I mean the parking lot isn't. We could do something nicer on that wall inside, I think.
Yeah.
I took your plans to suggest that wall would remain, and you
Yes.
create this urban alcove.
Right.
Basically, it's taking the roof off the thing, right?
Yeah, it's actually it's you see a ton of it in like old New Orleans, where you go into those old buildings and then you walk through a restaurant and then all of a sudden you're in this outdoor space behind them and it's surrounded by buildings on all sides.
Anything else from anybody? Any other
Just
questions, or is there anything else you want to call out?
okay.
Great.
Well, thank you.
I think it'll be a great
Thanks.
project. Thanks for
It's
taking the time to come in front of us.
an improvement.
All right. Next item on the agenda, item 5, staff comments. Are y'all commented out, staff?
I'll comment it out. Pretty much, I do have one comment, and the chairman and I have discussed this as we're working through some administrative approvals in downtown, and it's always a process, one in particular. But I think as we talked about this as a commission and reporting, finding a way that we could summarize and report administrative approvals without taking up, we're usually always here till 9 without taking up another hour of kind of going through things. They are by code, as long as the chair and I agree, then it is done. But reporting it out to you so that there's some history, and obviously now we have the chairmanship changes over, so some of that continuity is probably important too. So we're kind of wrestling. We did that for, I think, a month or two and kind of got to a place of this is taking them along to report it all at the meeting, and how do we show it to you in an effective, we give you a spreadsheet and sort of with words, but does that help you? What's the best way to do it? We can certainly summarize. We end in a permit with somebody that has conditions and a set of plans with it. So we could just email those to you as they get approved. It seems to me to be the most efficient way but it arrives in maybe quite a few emails for you.
It's usually a thread though, so.
Yeah, that would probably be, what I'm thinking is sometimes we do a final certificate of action, but behind that is the permit and the plans. A lot of times these plans evolve and kind of dribble in, to be honest with you, with an applicant. And so when we do that, we try to package the final thing, and if there are any conditions. So you don't necessarily see the entire email thread going back for 6 months that started with, hey, I got kind of an idea, how do I do this? But you see the final stuff.
Have to watch the sausage being made.
Yeah, sometimes you don't want to see the sausage being made, you just want to eat the sausage or whatever. But
the reason I brought this up is for a couple of reasons. One, Sarah Moore, we're doing a lot of work on, but also, so 50%, 60, 70% of these, it's Lance will send me an email or Diane will send me an email and it's a sign. And so I can, once that's approved, either staff or I, whoever, can just send that. And I think it's just good for you all to know that. So if something pops up, and you also kind of see the process, right? Oh, that makes sense. Sarah Moore happened to be, so Dave and I met personally over there.
Or you could disagree with our final decision.
We've gone, right. So I think that's good too. Feedback to, hey, what were you thinking? But something like Sarah Moore, there was a lot of moving pieces there. And I think because I don't want you guys driving by going, what? And, you know, I don't know what your friends are like. My friends, since we live here and we're downtown a lot, they're always like, what were you, how did that happen? Or, you know, with Coleman and I, they're always like, Joe, Mark, what were you guys thinking? So from an administrative standpoint, we were just talking, and I agree. I think the easiest way, most of them aren't a long thread. We can just copy you once the decision's made, copy you on the email.
I think it's probably what, as a practical matter, what happens is we go through our review. A lot of times we're working back and forth with an applicant before a chairman even sees something.
Right.
And then we'll go to the chair and say, hey, this is where we are with this. A case like Sarah Moore, here's a project to redo the front porch, basically. Here's sort of the 10 pieces of that when you break it down. Here's what we think you can approve administratively. Here's maintenance. That's just doesn't even require your approval. It's just straight up maintenance. Doesn't require ours. The applicant just wants our blessing on it. And here's a couple pieces that we probably got to talk about a little bit more detail, or maybe see a material sample or something like that. I think we already have arrived on that one with a permit that's conditioned on one of those pieces still having some detail coming in. But I think it makes sense then the chairman usually says approved, disapproved, or change this, change that, or send it to the full commission occasionally. We button the whole thing up then and send it to the applicant. That's the final real action. They do their project, we inspect it. I think at that point where we button it up and give the applicant that permit, makes sense for us, just being consistent, to just go ahead and send it out to the full commission, which might have an email chain. Sometimes it it's just more straight. It's a sign. It's more straightforward than that. But that one was particularly complicated. But since we're talking about the long and short of that is they're basically rehabbing the wood portions of the first story porch and the second story porch, which just has sort of this falling apart wrought iron black railing look, which is not historic. We have photographs where it kind of matched the size and scale of the first floor, but with a different pattern would be replaced. So that's cool. And they're trying to make it functional space for their occupants.
It's a giant porch, if you've ever watched.
You
can't enter
really
in there
deep.
anymore, but,
They're going to
right. So you're gonna put an ADA
reintroduce a
compliant-
door, an ADA ramp, and their tenants
Ramp.
could go out and enjoy the porch.
I mean, that's something.
Yeah.
So the only portion we're waiting on is there's a big railing that comes down from the porch, actually all the way to the street with a break for the sidewalk. It's black, thin,
It's wrought iron,
wrought iron
60s, 50s,
Ish.
60s, 70s.
stuff. It's not ADA compliant. They can't really put an ADA handrail on that. So they would need to replace that. The initial proposal was sort of a mixture of aluminum and PVC product. And we said, it probably would have to go to a full commission for determination in that regard. And I think they're changing to an all aluminum product that's also ADA compliant. And they have to, everything they do has to be that. So we're waiting on the details of that portion.
And we actually have guidelines around that due to our patios. So we can give them, hey, here's kind of what we'd like this to look like. And so that's where we are on that. So once they get, they're going to give us samples, final design.
Spec.
And spec. And
So,
that's the only thing that's holding that up.
so just a point of discussion. We'll start, I'll have staff, once I get them back, start doing that for you. And if you find that it is something that is not interesting to you, certainly let us do that. We can eliminate a step. If you find it's interesting, then that's great. We end up doing a lot of administrative reviews anymore, which is really facilitating things for building owners and applicants. And I think it's fine out there in the real world. I think it's working.
Yep.
So why mess with it?
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Dave. Any other staff comments, Dave?
I just have one very brief.
Wait a minute, we haven't got
Oh, sorry, you're in staff comments.
I just have one other thing, and it's sort of the soapbox of the comprehensive plan. The steering committee has met for the second time. We had a very good session with City Manager Tom Homan presenting kind of how cities are financed 101. There's a lot of confusion, I just think, generally out there about that, and then more specifically how the city of Delaware has its finances without going into agonizing detail, but getting people a flavor of how that happens, because as we do the comprehensive plan, we want to have vision that is short, medium, long range vision, and we want to have big ideas, but we also need to temper that against sort of fiscal realities and come up with what our solution is going to be collectively as a community. So it was a good session in that regard. Coming out of that, you will start to see, and I'm going to start to push out to you and others, and you may get it from me and hopefully several members of the steering commission as well. Some public outreach for the first round of our public involvement meetings, our broader public involvement meetings, which will take place near the end of September at about 5 different locations throughout the city to try to just spread it out. And then we'll also roll into we have a website for the plan, but also roll into more if you wanted to provide some feedback, electronic meetings, you could. The first round is going to be kind of an interactive session, workshop. And so it's kind of hard to reproduce that just in online because it's important to be there and also interact with your fellow citizens while you're doing this and hear their idea. But to the extent you can be involved in those, make sure you can get to one of those meetings if you can. Appreciate it. I do have some what we call rat cards, which give you FAQs and the dates before you leave the night. I'll hand it. I didn't bring it, so don't leave until I hand them to you. But then we also have some business cards that basically say, hey, here's the conference plan, here's the website, and to the extent that you're interacting with your fellow citizens in every kind of group that everybody's involved with here. It's important to get the word out, because if it isn't, if you're not involved, it certainly won't be your plan. And it needs to, at the end of the day, be our collective community plan. Council's been pretty clear with that direction as well. It's not council's plan. They'll have to vote on it at the end of the day, but it needs to be our community vision to be very successful. So, be on the lookout for that. That's a lot of work and good work, but we're having good steering committee meetings and some good public outreach.
Okay, thank you. Next item, item 6, commission member comments and
Can I
discussion.
go now?
Can I go?
Mine's very simple. I wanted to thank Mark Hatton here. First for the photo of the hotel in Marion. That was a nice touch. But more specifically, what we just talked about between you and city staff, this enhanced transparency, I think is a really wonderful move. And I appreciate it. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks to city staff. Anything else?
I have one.
Yes.
To tag on to what you guys were talking about with the administrative approval thing, not to be a lawyer tonight. We're all getting these emails and we're all responding individually saying that looks good. I know it's not the intent of the group, but if somebody from the outside looks at that, it's going to look like we're violating the Open Meetings Act by round robining something.
Yeah.
So I think we should just ask Karen Schulman if there's a way we can do that, because I think it's important for us to get the information. But when we reply and say that was
Disappointing
it
copy.
appears we're not really involved in the administrative approval process, I don't think, but it appears that we're okay.
Well, I think that was an unusual. So normally what we're talking about is sending out after the approval. So you won't see it until after the administrative approval. There have been some rare instances here where maybe the applicant either didn't have the details at the meeting, and we've said, do you think we can maybe cover that last little bit? I agree with you, probably the letter of the law. I think we've used it pretty sparingly. But that's usually the only, I can only think
We're
of.
not violating the spirit of all.
Yeah, correct.
With the fact though that we did vote, that was how we were going to kind of get through this particular case, that everybody there was, I guess, a vote, a unanimous vote.
We can't make a decision as a group without being in an open meeting on the record.
Okay, so the fact that we made an open decision to do it by, email doesn't doesn't skirt around that requirement of the
I
sign.
think really we were just saying it looks good. We weren't really getting our approval.
Right.
Administrative approval.
Right, you're having the
You had granted
Chairperson.
It would just
approval.
be an exception if somebody saw the emails, they'd be like, well, that looks.
Yeah, it's a good point. I'll check with her. You had granted on the bridge, you had granted approval for the bridge.
right
It was a question of a
redesign.
detail.
Yeah.
The one that council has done on that note is we have a consent agenda, which we do at the beginning, which is essentially a bunch of small things that we give, that staff does, and we just sort of vote on them at the beginning of the meeting. And Lynn reads them, and it's,
Well, and
they're
since
not
we,
individually considered and debated for a long time. because they're pretty-
this was the case since we meet once a month, and since all applicants, particularly the city, was in a time crunch. In fact, part of that was back due to get that back to you guys for the budgeting, so, but yeah.
I don't have any problem with the
Yeah.
process. I think it's a great process.
Okay,
It's a good point. I'll definitely check with her.
okay. Any other comments, either from staff, audience, anything else? Okay, well, the next regular meeting is scheduled for September 26th, and it kind of sounds like from our thing tonight, we will probably have a meeting on the 26th, so make sure it's on your calendar.
Does anybody know if they're not, that's the week after Jug Week? Anybody not gonna be here?
I will be here in September, but I'm going to actually be traveling in October for the scheduled meetings, so just on that.
I'm okay.
I will be here. Inshallah.
Okay, seeing no other business, a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.